Mutapa Kingdom is one of the biggest kingdoms in Africa, and it's one of the most impressive if you look at their architecture. Clearly, these people are not playing about how they see themselves and how seriously they take their architecture. But it's strange that a kingdom of people that seem to have no architecture prior to creating these great buildings have zero buildings. Like, how does that happen? Where did they get the practice? Well, today, the Zimbabwe and parts of Mozambique are thought to be the full extension of this empire under the Monomotapa. Monomotapa meaning the ruler of these conquered lands. But this interpretation does not match any of the ancient sources, or at least the historical sources from the 1600s, because Europeans interacted with a lot of these people. The story they tell is quite different. They tell of a kingdom that stretches from Zimbabwe all the way to Angola, one that stretches from the tips of Mozambique all the way to the promontory of the Cape of Good Hope. This would make it one of the largest empires in Africa. But we have to check the sources. So first, if we look at this map, we can see here that Monomotapa, written in large, is very different than being written in the corner somewhere in Zimbabwe. But you see here, it stretches from, okay, so we're going to do this easily. The southern part that's pink, that's South Africa. And you can see that it stretches inside of South Africa. And then it goes all the way this side. And then you can see places like Sofala over here. You can see Zanguba over there. Mono Eumegi over there. And you can see that there's just Toroya, Tropica, Gale, Same, Mofata, Monomotupa, just a whole bunch of places which are put in here as part of the kingdom. And right at the edges, if you look to the left, you can see there's Angola, there's Zambia, there's Abyssinia or Abyssinia right at the top. This is showing how large this was. Now, we can look at pictures all day, but there's also writing. To examine it properly, let's look at where modern people put Monomotapa today, or the Mutapa Kingdom today, and where the empire of Monomotapa is put by the people from the 1600s. And you see this map here is a little more conservative than the other one, but it still goes all the way to the Cape over here around South Africa. It dips down into southern Africa over here, and it's this giant yellow area here. You can see the Empire of Mutapa. But you see over there in this map, it's reduced to like this small two regions, not even encompassing the full countries they own today. The book we're looking at was published in 1668, but was written in 1639, and it covers all of Africa. From the history of ancient Egyptians, he writes about how the Egyptians traveled around the coast of Africa and went around Africa, being the first to do this through the Phoenicians. And then he writes about different states. And as you can see at the top, he writes about Robben Island, an island very close to South Africa. So this person is no dummy. He knows a lot about South Africa. And over there you can see the title, the second title, Het Keizerrijk van Monomotapa, which means the kingdom of Monomotapa, or the Empire of Monomotapa. And interestingly, what he writes is that Monomotapa is a really large place, and though it's centered in Zimbabwe, the empires that go from the buildings that go from Zimbabwe all the way to the Cape, so in Botswana and these places, are buildings that see the prince or the Kaiser of Monomotapa as their prince. So, in other words, they see him as their king, even though they're not in the same region. And this is also easily illustrated when you check that the Zimbabweans used to trade as far as the Cape. And so sending things through there is easy to see how they would have had control of those areas, not to mention control of more southerly areas like Mapungubwe, which is in southern Africa. And you can see because they were contemporaries, they existed at the same time. It's possible that this was just another extension of the Mutapa kingdom. So let's check. Het Keizerrijk of Land van Monomotapa bij Inigen als Joseph Baro Benomotapa in bij Sonnet Benomo Takajanemet, which that's a longer word. Leed de lander waard in voor het een zij gelegen koninkrijk van Sofala. Okay, so basically is explaining that there's many names which they call Benematapa, and down here they're explaining that it's by the sea next to the kingdom of Sofala. And going down, let's just skim through it. Basically, mentions that there's a river, a Zambezi River, Zambera, and he explains that there's also an island. You can see there at the bottom, Eland. It's only when we go to the next page that we can see it get a little more interesting. They continue to describe, and then it says here, okay, so it says 113 miles. Want ook al die klein koninkrijken van die river Manis tot eind die Kaap van Goederhoop worden gezeiden vorst van Monomotapa voor een opereer erkennen gelijk die van Torio en Butwa. Okay, so dan die gehele onttrek. Okay, so basically what he's saying is from the Cape to 100 miles from the Cape, there are kingdoms over there, and from these areas all the way like 100 miles away from the Cape, these kingdoms in between the Cape and Great Zimbabwe are owned by the Monomotapa. Then it says that the circumference of this area is about 100 and let's see, geraakt ben bij vullen op 735 French mijlen. So basically it's saying the circumference of the island is 705. Wait, is that 15? I don't know. And 5 and 13. Okay, I don't know, but it's something like 753 miles, French miles. The king of the kingdom has one big place in the capital, but Vincent LeBlanc calls the entire state, that's the map that you saw, he calls the entire state, including these outside areas, he calls them Monomotapa, and not just the one state. And then we carry on. We can see that over and over again they emphasize that the kingdom comes all the way to the Cape. You also see that he says, 1 5 miles from Sofala, there's houses of the Zinj where they spend all day. The palace of the king is huge. And if we go down, we can see that they talk about how they trade gold and they trade ivory and they trade other things with people. They mention that the kingdom is so filled with gold that the Portuguese called them the kings of gold. So now he mentions the kingdom of Butua or Butua, and you could tell that he's obviously saying that it's under the kingship of Bonamatapa. But more than this, its capital is calming. Its capital is amazing. If you look at the pictures, it's beyond, even in my estimation, than Great Zimbabwe. I have to state immediately why you see holes in the architecture. You can see that they're done on purpose. These holes would be terrible for the architecture here, but it's a style, and the reason the style exists is because this is a symbolic thing. It symbolizes unity, this checkered pattern, and it also has other symbols, but let's not worry about that. These buildings have the same checkered pattern that you would see on Kuba cloth on their um, kilts. And you can see here, it says here, this is Kuba cloth, the checkered pattern. The checkered pattern on Kuba cloth represents the idea of balance and harmony and the concept of dualism, in which opposing forces are seen as complementary and necessary to maintain balance. Of course, there was trade between Great Zimbabwe and Zaire, which is Congo today, and Zambezi. These places, this is how you know that these communities were not separated. You see how that map had that area circled all the way to Zaire? So you see it says Great Zimbabwe was also at the hub of an extension local network. Tin ingots came from 600 kilometers to the south. Iron bells were probably made near the Zambezi, if not in Zaire, and such things as copper, salt, soapstone, cattle, and grain were part of a system of tribute that supported the capital. In Great Zimbabwe, the Great Enclosure, you can see patterns and symbols that show the status of apparently young man or the king. On the top, these chevron pattern, as they call them. On their own, though, those zigzags represent water, and you can see that it says that the Shona people, those zigzags represent a snake of fertility. You see how a lot of these kingdoms, they have these words for these symbols. Another historical figure writes to us. His name is Duarte Bobosa. He writes in the book called The Book of Duarte Bobosa, Volume 1. And you can see it's Zimbabwe, so we're talking about Zimbabwe. In this town of Benimatapa is the king's most usual abode in a very large building, and thence the traders carry the inland gold to Sofala and give it unweighed to the Moors for colored cloths and beads, which are greatly esteemed among them, which beads come from Kambaya. As regards Benimatapa, these Moors say that the gold comes from a place yet further away towards the Cape of Good Hope, from another kingdom subject to the king of Benimatapa, who is a great lord with many kings under him. He is lord of an exceeding great country, which runs far inland and also extends as well to the Cape of Good Hope and Mozambique. By the way, Duarte Barbosa died in 1521, meaning that he wrote this book somewhere in the early or late 1400s, early 1500s. This is prior to or at an earlier date than the guy we read before. I don't know what other evidence we can use to show that the kingdom of the Benimatapa was most certainly a large kingdom that had influences and kings that were vast indeed.